Good morning, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and start today's talk. I'd like to introduce Madhu Viswanathan. He is the Diane and Stephen N. Miller Professor in Business at the University of Illinois, and he's been on the faculty here since 1990. His research focuses on two areas. The first is measurement and research methodology, and the second is literacy, poverty, and subsistence marketplace behaviors. He directs the Subsistence Marketplace Initiative and has created unique synergies between research, teaching, and social initiatives. He founded and directs the Marketplace Literacy Project, a not-for-profit organization that is pioneering the design and delivery of marketplace literacy education to low-income consumers and subsistence marketplaces. He has received research, teaching, curriculum development, social entrepreneurship, humanitarian, leadership, public engagement, international achievement, and career achievement awards. His course on subsistence marketplaces was ranked one of the top entrepreneurship courses by Inc. magazine. Please join me in welcoming Madhu.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here. First of all, I have to say knock, knock. Mad. That's me. That's right. Thank you. But I want to say it's a real honor because, I think NCSA is absolutely, I would almost say that the jewel at the University of Illinois. I want you to know that I take a lot of credit by contributing nothing, but I take a lot of credit for NCSA whenever we talk about Illinois. So it's a great honor to be here. It's my 25th year as a professor here. We were just talking about the fact I've never worked a day in my life. I did my undergraduate at the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras, Chennai now, in mechanical engineering, which is right away an insult to all of you. The fact that I have a technical degree, it's a crime. That's all I can say. It's an absolute crime. But one of the things I used to do in my undergraduate days, and I think you know often the story in a country like India in the late 70s, early 80s is either you become a medical doctor or an engineer to survive or have a future, or it seemed that way. And so basically, that's what I chose engineering. But the one thing I did a lot in my undergraduate days is I played very competitive bridge, actually at the national level. And for me, chess was engineering and bridge was the social sciences. Because in any given deal, you have no clue what the cards are like. And if Shaquille O'Neal can beat me at basketball 100 times out of 100, in bridge, I actually have a chance against the world champions, at least on one deal. And so I liked that mix of psychology and statistics. And so I said, I'm going to apply for a PhD in marketing, in business administration. And so I did that at the University of Minnesota, and I was very fortunate to get a job here in 1990. So I'm going to talk to you about my journey over the last almost 17, 18 years in what I ended up calling subsistence marketplaces. This is a marketplace in Haiti where people are buying and selling cookies made out of mud. And it has some nutritional value, but it is very harmful as well. And these are some of the choices that people make in extreme poverty. And so when I use the word subsistence, I really mean the broad range of low income. Some people completely just in survival mode, all the way to some people who are moving from low income to perhaps lower middle. So I really mean it in a broader sense of low income, barely making ends meet. This to me is a picture of interconnectedness. And it's interconnectedness between economic, environmental, and social. And this is from Mozambique. And the economic resource here, of course, is firewood for cooking. And with deforestation, there is less and less firewood. The environmental issues are both at the macro level in terms of deforestation and at the micro level in terms of inhaling smoke in a small hut or a dwelling. And as a result, it's like women have smoked several packets of cigarettes a day. And it's social because as it takes longer and longer to find firewood, girls are not sent to school for an education, and rather they are sent to find firewood. Now, this is the kind of slide I use in my talk, and there is a characteristic of this kind of work. The moment I leave the setting I'm in, then I right away seem to create some distance by either through the words I use or the slides I use and so on. And this came back to me came home to me when I met a woman in a marketplace, an elderly woman who apologetically was selling firewood. And she said, I didn't cut any green trees. The wood was already on the ground. And so those are some of the norms for people who are living their environment. So they see the long-term, they see deforestation, they see the long-term drought, and so on. And so it became a lot more real to me. This, of course, is an image you'll see in many places around the world. It's a more optimistic image. And it's amazing how people who are poor and of low literacy have adapted to technologies that truly serve a need. And so, incoming calls are often, incoming calls are free. And so people will, of course, say, I will missed call you, which is a grammatically perfect sentence, by the way. And it's amazing how people use the system. And entrepreneurs, poor entrepreneurs, will close deals based on the number of rings. 1 ring means I agree to your price, 2 rings means I don't, and so on. And I would argue that when you go to a very different setting, like what I call subsistence marketplaces, and design for it, then in some ways, you're creating a potential to design for all settings. And so, that's certainly there. For example, I would argue M-Pesa out of Kenya is far ahead of Western countries in terms of using the cell phone for financial transactions. I also want to tell you, I want to use this image to tell you, I have never been poor. I come from a very privileged section of Indian society. I've had all the education that I wanted. And so how does somebody like me claim to have studied poverty over 17 or 18 years without presuming that there is nobody in the audience who's experienced poverty? There are always people who have experienced it in some form or the other. And to be very honest with you, I feel I'm the least qualified. But I will say that the way I would try to explain it from studying it is really to explain the typical day to you. Like today, I have my routine. I have the flavor of tea I wanted to drink. I have to go to the gym, come back. I had a Skype call to Tanzania, and then I came here, and Laura was very kind to get me a parking permit. Everything worked. The roads worked, my communication worked, and for the most part, things work. I have a lot of certainty in my life. And over and above that, if things don't work, in most situations, I have a fallback option. And so if my cell phone doesn't work, I find another way, and if the internet doesn't work, I'll use my Verizon connection or whatever. And so I have a fallback option as well. If you take away all the certainty, and if you take away the fallback option, where the margin of error is huge, you have poverty. So I don't know where my next meal is going to come from. I don't know the quality of the staple food. I don't know the quality of the water to cook the meal, and I don't know about my source of cooking energy and so on. So poverty to me is really about uncertainty. And I will still remember in 1997 when I took a group of people from our local Urbana Adult Education Center to Prairie Garden over in West Springfield, and I watched them shop, and I thought, the things I take for granted. It's your first impression, and it remains with me. The things that I take for granted or assume is what I would say. One of the things about living in poverty, subsistence, is people live their environment. It is not an issue that's far away. It's not an issue where people can just raise their windows of their car and drive away. If I throw plastic on the street, it will block my sewage, and the disease will come right back to me. So people absolutely live their environment as well. This is just an ebook that I recently published about a year ago. Deliberately wanted to price it. So I like self-publishing a lot. I really wanted to sell it, and that way I can price it at $6 or $7, and I'll be very happy to share information about this. But I think it's so important to carve out what is new or unique about this rather than overclaiming. People have looked at poverty in so many different ways, and people have had an impact in so many different ways. There are a number of approaches to poverty and business, or poverty and marketplaces. You can think of a macroeconomic approach, which is very important. You can think of what's been called the bottom of the pyramid approach, where people started with organizations, companies, social enterprises, and looked at how they function. But we wanted to start in a different place. We started with individuals, consumers, entrepreneurs, their life circumstances. So at a very micro level, we wanted to understand how people think and relate. So we wanted to go beneath any more relatively macro level approach. It could be psychological, it could be sociological, and so on. And I deliberately called it subsistence marketplaces. To me, the word subsistence keeps the focus on the qualitative nature of life circumstances. It's certainly helpful to have $1 a day, $2 a day descriptions, but I wanted to keep the focus qualitatively. And the word marketplaces to me is very important. Not markets, but marketplaces. Because I think the word markets, particularly for us in business, it leads to this notion of existing products being sold in new markets. The word marketplaces to me connotes that these are pre-existing marketplaces that we first need to learn from in order to design solutions for them and perhaps for all of us. So the idea here is not to remain a psychologist or a sociologist, nothing wrong with that, but to be bottom up. So in other words, what do these insights mean for designing products, technology, and so on? We have been very fortunate in having this integrated approach. We've done a lot of research of this kind, looking at consumers, entrepreneurs, how they make decisions, all the way through to ecosystems, how to design products, what should enterprise models look like, and so on. We have also, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot by failing at doing. And so I run the social enterprise now for more than a decade on marketplace literacy. It provides marketplace literacy education, and so I have people who work for me in a number of different countries, and I've learned a lot by failing. I've learned a lot by failing at using technology and so on, and we've also brought it into the curriculum at the University of Illinois, and I will talk about each of these. My journey started at Urbana-Adult Education almost 18 years ago, in looking at people who are of low income and low literacy and the problems they face in the marketplace. So in a sense, I was trying to unpack poverty, not just in terms of material constraints, but cognitive constraints as well, and sometimes emotional constraints as well. So there are other constraints that people living in poverty have. Our approach was not to show ways in which people living in poverty have deficits. Our approach was to show both sides, strengths and vulnerabilities. And sometimes we show how that people can even be better because of their life circumstances. At the bottom left is in Tanzania with the Maasai community that we work with there. This is a tribal area in the center of India, and this is from South India. This kind of a journey is very, very rewarding. On the top left, we were at a village in South India hit by a tsunami. And I'll never forget those 2 hours I spent there with my students from the University of Illinois. It was just captivating. I was the translator, but I was absorbing what the 50 villagers or so were telling us. They told us how they saw the tsunami, how they ran, how they found the bodies of their near and dear, how every sector of society failed them in the year or two after that. And as I was doing that, I was looking at my students, 30 students, and I was looking at the 50 villagers, and I thought, no effort is too much to make this kind of meeting of the cultures. And I have to say, my students, it's an interdisciplinary class. So I have always had, technical, design, business, and other areas. And so and I'll talk about that in a moment. This is me teaching marketplace literacy with the Maasai community in Tanzania. This is me with groups of women, self-help groups of women, and we form these self-help groups as part of our social enterprise. 10 to 20 women who my women field coordinators, who I'm very proud of, will go and get out of the house and say, come together as a group. And mind you, this is in the 4th largest city in India in 2015. And people, when women come out of their homes, they meet other women, they talk about a lot of things. We create a savings plan for them with their money. We link them to banks, but we don't lend. And then we give them this marketplace literacy education and so on. And so that's what we do. I want to be very, very careful and humble about what we do. We have deep engagement in a few places around the world. That's it. And among them, most recently, is also a refugee settlement in Uganda. And right now I'm teaching them through Skype. I'll be visiting them in June. This is work with the UN Refugee Agency, and I'm so glad because they see potential in my approach of marketplace literacy for for refugees, long-term refugees. But more importantly, I love to work with different communities, and so it's giving me that opportunity as well. We have brought it into the curriculum in a number of different ways, and these are the different companies and social enterprises we work with. I'm more interested in the way business happens in a very different part of the world, where much of business happens. Exchanges have been happening since the beginning of civilization. And as a result, businesses are interested because they feel we offer a very unique bottom-up approach. So for John Deere, it's like, how does a 2-acre farmer think? For Abbott, similarly, how does a homemaker think, and so on. And so the bottom-up approach we have developed really meets their top-down as well, I think. And so I'm very happy to work with them. So in a sense, I'm saying something lofty, but I tend to do that just to hold my feet to the fire. I really believe I'm interested in what businesses can be. rather than what they currently do. And so that's what we've done. We work with student organizations. A number of things are important, as you know, in an academic setting, creating a field of research, through conferences, through editing special issues to help junior scholars, and then, of course, bringing it into the curriculum. So we reach almost 1,000 students at the University of Illinois. Our anchor course is a year-long course with admission by application. It is truly interdisciplinary, even though it's listed in the business school. We have done 39 projects over almost 10 years now. Every project has always had technical, design, and business students, and then others as well. And I've taught this at Coursera, where we've had tens of thousands of students. I've taught it 3 times so far. We are offering an online course for UN refugee agency staff and so on. So it's been a very interesting journey in bringing it back into the curriculum. And we have a web portal that educators around the world use. We produce day-in-the-life videos. We were involved in a movie. We have all kinds of things that we try to share for educators and students around the world. And finally, on the social side, we have pioneered this notion of marketplace literacy, where we don't teach people what to buy or what to sell. We teach them how, and more importantly, why. Because if I'm poor and living in the immediate world, the deeper understanding eludes me, as I will illustrate in just a moment. And so that's what we do through marketplace literacy. We've reached tens of thousands of women in India. We have small programs in urban and rural Tanzania, in Chicago, Southern Illinois, and so on. Again, I want to emphasize, of the 3 things I mentioned to you, doing research to understand subsistence marketplaces, creating education about subsistence marketplaces for our students, and then creating education for subsistence marketplaces. I have some level of satisfaction with the first 2. But with the third, I'm very, very dissatisfied, because the potential is infinite, and particularly when you have an educational goal like this, but our impact is so minuscule. So that's certainly part of my mission as we move forward. So let me just give you a flavor for what do I mean by these insights that I've set up for so long. And I just want to mention that, as I said, we have depth of understanding in a few contexts. But I want to give you a flavor for how, what this translates in terms of how people think, perhaps feel, and then how they engage in the marketplace. First of all, I want to start out by saying, if I were to go to the county market nearby to buy something, I'm going to very quickly go in. Let's say I want a cash transaction. I'm going to trade off a few things. So this is the bread. This has got so many grain and so on, and I like this. It's got a deal. I come to the counter. I don't have enough money. Not a big deal. I put something aside. I pay for whatever I want to by cash, and then I walk out. Let's say that's what I do. What I just described to you doesn't even begin to touch on what people with low literacy have to do, because what I took for granted is where they spend 80 or 90% of their effort. It may be to search for a product. It may be to find the bottom line price. It may be to say, I need to buy 150 candles. So where is a packet of 100? Where is a packet of 50? It may be, if one costs $1.50, how much does 2 cost? I would give a task like give people $50 and say you got to buy these 6 things. And so people would buy one thing for $1.50 and then subtract out and see how much is left. Sense of magnitude is something that comes to us naturally, not if you're in the extreme level of low literacy. And again, I'm kind of describing a continuum to you, but I'm sometimes using the extremes to make a point. Unit pricing is an abstraction. In all these years, I have not found somebody who uses unit pricing. It's an abstraction. I saw people who would say, who would stay away from any percentage of sales. If it's 30%, no, I won't go near because I don't know what the final price is. And so then, maybe if it's half off, I'll buy it because I can figure out what half off is. So these are some of the things that we observed. Computing the total in a shopping basket could be a problem as well. And the kind of work I did was very different from the experimental design in social science I was used to. This is really about talking to people, having them shop, observing them, asking them a few questions near the shelf, and then coming back and debriefing with them. I want to just put this under a couple of umbrellas. One of the things that people do is what I call concrete thinking. And by that I mean, I buy the cheapest. Well, there are 2 different sizes of bread. You get more bread if you buy the one for $2.50 instead of the one for $1.50. This is double the size. I buy the cheapest. Sometimes people buy the cheapest because they are poor. But in this case, it's more than that going on. It is difficulty abstracting across two pieces of information. It's not impossible, it's difficult because of all the other things that they have to deal with. There was a Russian psychologist in the 1920s who studied low literate peasants in Central Asia, and he would give them a hammer, a saw, and a hatchet, and he would say, what's the word for this? And they would say the word, well, he wanted them to say the word tools, but they would say, well, if there's a tree, I can chop firewood, I can keep my family warm. So low literacy leads to living in the immediate visual graphic world of here and now and how can I use something. And this is where I'm least qualified. I had all the education. Abstraction to me is a natural thing from instances to a concept and so on. So that's what I mean by concrete thinking. With the Maasai, I buy the biggest. Why? Because I got to walk that 20 miles across. And it's, just to go to the main road to get that soap. So I buy the biggest. And so this manifests in a lot of different ways. And I'm really talking about, combining, pieces of information. Healthiness is an abstraction. Are you healthy? Well, I didn't go to the hospital. So yeah, I'm healthy. Nutrition is an abstraction. Some of the things my students do, they will try to essentially, they'll say, here's a hypothetical product. It's a powder you can add that will make whatever you're doing, rice or wheat or chapati, which is a wheat-based tortilla, food, it'll make it more nutritious. People say, oh, no, I don't know what you mean. I'll tell you how I make food good for my children. I'll add this, this, and this, and that's how I make it good. No, we are asking you to imagine this hypothetical. That's already an abstraction. So people struggle with abstractions. Interest rate is an abstraction. And so why? Because I have to abstract across time. And so you will, very often the non-collateral loans are represented in a very concrete way. For example, 10 rupees non-collateral loan means I'm giving you a 1,000 rupee loan. I will only give you 850 rupees upfront. You pay me 10 rupees a day for the next 100 days. So it's really concretized. And, basically, if you don't pay, how do I enforce it? Public humiliation. And this is the emotional side as well. I take away the only thing you have, which is your dignity or your self-respect. And I do it publicly, and I shout expletives outside your house and take that away. And so this is where it's very interesting when you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Dignity sustains people. Self-respect sustains people even when they starve. And sometimes that's the only thing they have in a very intensely social one-on-one world. Business is an abstraction. You mean I can buy there and sell there? I know how to exchange, but business, enterprise, that's an abstraction as well. So, and then I want to say, I have learned as much from my team, who are all people living in poverty. So my approach is very bottom-up from that sense as well. They're all people living in poverty, and now by the way, I'm very proud to say, as they started working with me, they have made a better life for themselves. Quite a few have moved to lower middle class, and so on. So I have seen them move up. And I feel like they are part of the emerging economy where people are moving up. But to this day, even after working with people for 15 years, I see some of their tendencies. Sir, my left arm is numb, but now it's okay. What do you mean? Why was it numb? What happened? Well, you're only talking about a symptom. No, sir, I went to the doctor, they gave me medicine, it's okay. Turns out it's a mini stroke. And so causality is very flat. I would go even further. The notion that if I do this, this will happen is itself a very middle class notion. You can go to areas of, in poverty in the US where things are so random. So, well, if I do this, this will happen. Well, it happened to me, but it doesn't necessarily happen to people living in poverty. That's not reflective of the random world that they live in. One other very quick thing on concrete thinking, because I think it's very relevant to the kind of work you do, which is pictographic thinking, which is not depending on pictures. It's more than that. It's depending on your senses. What you see is what you get. And I know that. I don't need an education to know that. And so I know people who will pattern match prescriptions with the actual medicine, people who will take the bus number 17 to go somewhere. Maybe a husband or child wrote the number on somebody's hand. They'll pattern match, and along comes bus number 17A. They'll take that and go to a completely different place. Pictographic thinking, I want to tell you that I don't like to romanticize poverty, but I really don't want to describe people living in poverty as victims, nor do I describe them as natural entrepreneurs. Neither is true. They have strengths and vulnerabilities just as I do. And it's so important to understand both. They can run circles around me on things that I can't even imagine, right? I just want to emphasize that I had the privilege of tutoring a woman at an adult education center right here in Illinois. I consider it a privilege. She had such a difficult life, and she had a second grade education. Think about that, second grade education. But she was ingenious in overcoming her constraints, because she would keep 10 $5 bills in her mind. Anytime she brought a product, she'll take off a $5 bill, and that's how she shopped. So she took an abstract addition task and made it concrete. It was her idea. She did it. And so, this is what people come up with as well. And again, I don't want to romanticize. There are many things people do that are totally, that are just dysfunctional. But then there are some things they come up with as well. By pictographic thinking, I mean, I'm not going to look at the unit of measurement. That is an abstraction. I'm going to visualize how much sugar I need. I'm going to visualize the situation and me pouring sugar, and I'm going to buy the package that matches that. So really, these are very different ways of thinking for us to adapt to, because we are so used to literacy and so on. I just want to say one thing about self-esteem. I feel sometimes the stigma of low literacy is bigger than the stigma of poverty, because it's the low literacy that led to my poverty. So here I am, I described my typical shopping experience to you. I came to the counter, I didn't have enough money. I said, no big deal. I put something aside and left. Why? Because the attribution was to my forgetfulness. When somebody who's low literate comes to the counter, sometimes having enough money is cause for celebration. Not having enough money is cause for despair, because their attribution is to their being exposed for their low literacy, which is the cause of their circumstances in life, or at least they certainly see it as the cause of their circumstances. So these are some of the things we like to unpack, and this is what I mean by bottom-up. For me, a word like social capital, it's too macro. I want to peel that onion more, and that's what I mean by bottom-up. And again, peeling it as it relates to the marketplace, not other realms of poverty, but as it relates. And we find people cope in a number of different ways. I remember one man who basically told me that he can count, but he can't read it. And he kept saying, I buy the same brand. And I said, politely, I said, but, how do you know it's the same brand? He said, ain't nothing wrong with my eyes. Meaning the brand name is actually an image or an object in a scene, not a word to be read. And one of the experiments we did, I love doing qualitative and experimental work, because qualitative draws out a picture for me, and experimental and other kinds of designs help me go to part of the picture. So one of the experiments we did, we had these brand logos, which is a brand name along with a picture. And whenever we used brand logos, the memory for somebody who's low literate and moderately literate was comparable. Whenever we used brands as plain words, somebody with low literacy, their memory dropped off. And whenever we used brand logos, but fictitious brand logos, their memory dropped off. It had to be something they were familiar with looking at pictorially. So these are the kinds of things we like to do. We are really not interested in showing again and again and again what deficits people with low literacy have. I'm going to say just one very quick thing about the relationships in the marketplace. As I would describe this as a one-on-one interactional marketplace. And I just want to give you one example of it. I'm a poor woman. I'm in an urban area in India, in South India, let's say, and I have a choice of either buying here or here. Large reseller 2 miles away won't give me credit, but cheaper. Neighborhood retailer knows me, will give me credit in times of need, but marks up and sometimes keeps account. I don't keep account. He keeps account, and he may mark up for generic items because he knows it's on credit. So I'm asking a poor woman, essentially I'm asking her, do you check prices when you buy from this person? I asked this woman, do you check prices? And she said, no, imagine how the shop owner would feel. And again, by the way, this is a very extreme atypical response. I don't want you to think this is how people are at all, but I want to make a point with it. Well, I listen to that and I say, That's not the rational thing for her to do. The rational thing for her to do is to go to the large reseller and stock up at the beginning of the month. That's the rational thing, not giving money like this and so on. By the way, he offers other services. He will secure 1,000 rupees for you, and he'll return 950 rupees because he'll secure it from an alcoholic husband or from a thief because you live in a hut. And so I go in there and I say, that's not the rational thing. She should stock up at the beginning of the month and buy here. But think about what I assumed. It goes back to what I take for granted. I said beginning of the month. That means I assumed monthly income. Not necessarily the case. I said stock up. No. She would rather starve than forego paying her child's school fees or a health emergency. So stocking up is not the rational thing for her to do. She has the resilience to starve, but she needs that money for another emergency. And finally I said, go here. Well, what happens when she has the next crisis? He's going to call her and say, just pay back all my loans and then go wherever you want. Don't come back. So even though she's concrete thinking, pictographic thinking, she has to think about the medium term and negotiate it in order to move forward in life. And so she has to think about the next crisis, and that's how she plans out. And the point I want to make with this is simply that I have strengths and weaknesses, so does she. But she is an expert in survival. She has survived up to that point, and there is something to be said for her notion of rationality and how she goes about it. And all I'm saying is that mutual learning mindset is very important. And I've taken hundreds of students over, and what I find is they have that mindset. I have too much baggage. They then can create solutions and really create that magic as well, because they are able to really go in with an open mind and then learn what's happening and so on. One of the most rational things I ever heard in my life was when I asked a poor woman in a village, do you plan? Why? Planning is good, right? She said, no, why should I plan? Why should I plan where I don't even know where my next income is going to come from? So planning is good for me, given all the certainties I have in life. So my point really is that, like everything else, this is very hard to understand. It's all the more hard because it's not the way I grew up. And so I have to make an even bigger effort to get this bottom-up insight. And I would argue that whether it's business, social enterprise, or the development world, this is the piece they often neglect. I have taken people who run NGOs to the field and said, just spend some time in your own field. Get away from the PowerPoint files for a while, right? Just spend some time talking to people. And they are saying, wow, I never talked to them like this. I didn't know this. And so the bottom-up is often the hardest to do. And by bottom-up, I mean a lot of things. Already, once I know this, I've become top-down because I'm telling you this is what I learned. So I'm already becoming top-down. So now when I go to the next setting, when I go to Tanzania or Uganda, I have to be bottom-up again. So I'm not saying we should be purely bottom-up. If we are purely bottom-up, what am I even doing there? Let people do whatever they want bottom-up, right? No, I mean the bottom-up is neglected, and the bottom-up has to meet the top-down. Whether it is an organization and its community, or it's our prior knowledge and new knowledge, that's what I'm trying to say with the bottom-up approach. I also want to point out that an entrepreneur will move resources around family, suppliers, and customers. So here's this person, I met her 14 years ago, and they're all like, it's like yesterday, because you never forget the stories. People tell me, I'm telling you things I will only tell God. And it's so moving to hear that. They're so generous. But they move money around. They will give credit to the customer. They'll pay off the supplier and so on. And round it goes. And the family is the cushion. And the family suffers until a family emergency comes and they go to the customer and say, now you've got to pay up because I don't have a margin for error. My point is how fungible the resources are. And a microfinancing company may say, you know what, we gave you a business loan, you used it for consumption. That's not what we intended it to do. That's fine. But the very notion of having compartments like business and customer assumes resources. I have a den, I have a living room, I have compartments in my life. Mentally, I have compartments in my life. All of that is blurred when you barely have resources. And that's what I mean by bottom-up insights, that microfinancing companies have to understand that you can do this, but that's not the way people's thinking is and so on. I am going to do something very irritating, which is move forward on these slides. But I just wanted to say very briefly, if there was a third grade educated person in an India or a Tanzania versus the US, who has higher marketplace literacy? ironically the person living in more extreme poverty. Because it's a one-on-one marketplace, some people may curse them if they ask a question, somebody else will help out. They negotiate, they count out change, they buy generic products, they themselves are sellers, and if they get it wrong, they don't have the next meal. In the US, we find there's a big difference between people who are poor and literate and people who are poor and low literate. People who are poor and low literate, we know people who will not go shopping till a brother comes from a neighboring state. And so they deal with large stores, they deal with technology that adds for them, and they have these packages that assume a certain level of literacy. And as a result, they don't have that one-on-one world, and I would argue they have lower marketplace literacy as well. Very quickly, as I said, in terms of our anchor course, this is really the time when students are applying. I've had students, many wonderful students from the engineering side of campus. We've done many projects with a lot of different clients. I want to point out that something from project, as you know, even a year-long project with an international immersion to commercialization is a whole different story. Only a trickle has moved on. Where we find businesses or social enterprises have used our learning. On some occasions, it may be the prototype itself, but usually it may be something else, like the method that we used and so on. So we have some extended relationships here. These are some of the companies I mentioned. But we have created a bottom-up innovation, a product development or innovation platform, which starts with virtual immersion. So what we do is we basically have our students just read interviews I've conducted, write first-person accounts, build models of poverty, build models of the environment in poverty, and so on. Never ever mentioning business for a while. It's about life circumstances. And then from there, we, a virtual immersion, we use day-in-the-life videos, we use immersion, exercise of all kinds. From there, I've already put them into groups and they're beginning to generate ideas. But in the meanwhile, there is another phase called immersion, meaning when you submerge yourself in a very different context and re-emerge, what are some new concepts that have come about, or how can you extend your concepts, whether it's engineering, design, business, and so on. That's what I mean by immersion. And then they go to idea generation before they go to the actual field. And in the field, we are able to create this experience for them because we are the academic entity and we are the social enterprise. We are not outsourcing to somebody else. And so we create that experience without a filter, and the students tell me the experience is life-changing, and I say, well, why is it life-changing? It's because they see for themselves and they listen and talk to people. So we can go to one of our villages, 6-7 projects, 6-7 different directions, observation, interviews. It's because it's our community. So that's the model, and I think it's a unique model that we are also the academic entity. So there is no separation at all, and and these are full-time people working for and with me. And then they come back, and it's very important to have them reflect and step back, because when you go on an intense actual immersion, people have a tendency to fixate, and we want them to step back and then reconverge as well. These are just some prototypes, like spoken English, where I see a cell phone and somebody else sees a solution of some sort, and I'm going to skip through some of this very quickly, if you don't mind. But I just wanted to say, since this is more on the technology side, I'm going to just say a couple of things about product design, which is that in this kind of setting, it's important to understand the life circumstances. So here I am, I'm unfamiliar with the setting. And, it's also a highly resource-constrained setting. So I have to anticipate the usage situations for the product. So if I want to optimize a design to make a stove child-proof, well, it's going to be at the floor of a hut with 4 or 5 different children running around. So good luck. So the notion of optimizing itself assumes I know the situations. The user doesn't know how they're going to use something. So you almost have to user-proof the product. You have to assume it's going to be misused or used for cross purposes. I'm going to take that detergent. I'm going to use it to kill ants. Anything that's mobile, I'm going to put luggage in it and move it around. Right? And so these are some of the things to think about as well. How do we leverage existing infrastructure? There's a tendency to think if people are poor, then you can always have a device and a microfinancing plan for every need. And there's really not that much resources to be doing some of those things. So these are some of the things I wanted to talk about. I want to just very briefly mention what how we have deployed marketplace literacy. And what I want to say is, what is unique about what we do is we don't teach people what to buy, we teach them how and why. And that is what was a huge gap. People are taught a livelihood, but they're not taught about broader marketplaces. So we really focus on know why. And I wanted to just skip to one thing, which is we have created a very unique platform to teach this. So our most successful model is with one of the largest microfinancing companies in the world, where we basically approached them and said, look, it's a win-win. You're giving loans to hundreds of thousands of women. But what if you educated them as well on marketplace literacy? Then they're going to repay the loans. So it's a win for you, it's a win for them. And they're a very enlightened organization. I really like them, but they were interested in making a movie. And what we suggested to them is a movie is a very good motivational platform as they had envisioned, but we used the movie to create 14 video-based modules with a teacher on the screen. So there are 20 women in a room, somebody plays a DVD, there is no physical teacher, which is a huge barrier to scaling these things. And we use clips from the movie to illustrate concepts, we get a discussion going, and that's really where the education happens, right? It doesn't happen because I play a video. And so the in-class is about using clips from a very interesting, I hope a motivational movie about a woman who empowers herself through the marketplace. And then out-of-class homework is applying it to their own lives. Like, for example, remember how she came up with a product idea. You now come up with an idea as a group. And then they come back and present. We have 800 caricatures we created for this. We have concept caricatures because we don't want to give up on the know why. And so these are some of the things that we did. And I'm just going to very quickly see if I can show you. What I'm going to show you is a clip from our regular class. If I can find this, here you go, I think it's here. From our regular class. Got it, sorry. Thank I wanted to show you that because it keeps me honest. That tells me that it doesn't matter what videos I have, what websites I have. It really doesn't matter what I have. Education happens when people wrestle with, apply, and all of those different things. And so that's, and that's a clip from our face-to-face program. But I really think we have identified a need, created a solution, deployed a technology. In this case, as I said, it's the teacherless approach for low literate people. And so we have a pathway, I hope, to something broader. And then I have to tell you this, the hardest thing to do is create an enterprise model, meaning why should anybody do what you want them to do, think they should do, and so on. So creating the incentives to keep it happening. I like to start small. I like to say I don't like to break promises, but I break up promises. And then go from there. So we've learned a lot on bottom-up enterprise. This story has 3 steps. The first step is moving from sympathy to informed empathy. Sympathy is a natural reaction. I think informed empathy gets us farther, including finding out how poor somebody really is. It may sound harsh, but I think it's precisely when you feel warm and fuzzy that you have to ask tough questions. Secondly, using understanding to design solutions for subsistence marketplaces. And thirdly, designing solutions for advanced economies from subsistence marketplaces. Right? And if you can design the $20 cell phone for the sweat and the dust and high temperatures, well, look out other contexts. And so that is something to keep in mind. And so telemedicine, we need it in West Virginia. We need it in Virginia. M-Pesa, it started in Kenya. We need it elsewhere. So this is also called reverse innovation as well. I'm going to stop here. I want to just say a couple of provocative things and stop. One is I really think in this setting, implementation is 95%. I mean, intellectual property is very important. Please don't get me wrong. But it's the implementation that's everything. It's implementation, implementation, implementation. You need that great idea. You need the great technology. But it's so much about getting people involved. I will also say that, I have a friend who makes solar ovens near Chicago, and he sells it all around the world. And a minister in Uganda told him, don't ever come back to my country because your solar ovens cause wife abuse. Why? They cook the meal when the sun is out at 3 p.m. and the husband show up at 10 p.m. and the food is cold. The point he makes is it's the culture, not the technology. Now, obviously, it's both. But I just wanted to emphasize the culture part. The notion that people living in poverty need low technology is a huge myth. Sometimes they need even higher technology for those circumstances. And so those are some of the things I just wanted to mention. And I want to go back to the images I started off with. And when you see this image, you feel like it's happening now, it's far away to others not like us, and it won't happen to us. This image, when I see this, I think, well, it's happening in the future. It's somewhat far away, but it's happening to others somewhat like us, and I'm not sure how likely it is to happen to us. It feels closer in North America. This is Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans. This is the Gulf oil spill, and now I'm thinking it's happening now closer to home to others like us. I'm certain it happened. To me, this leads to the ultimate conundrum, which is that in subsistence marketplaces, people live the environment. Even though they have low literacy and low income, they have to envision the medium term. Deforestation, there's not going to be any trees, so they have to figure this out. In advanced marketplaces, a lot of these problems seem far away, even though we have the ability and the resources to think the longer term. So I find people are sometimes unable but willing in subsistence marketplaces, and our challenge is we are able, but are we willing? Can we bridge these distances to create sustainable innovation? So that's really the challenge for me. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.